Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode. And today I'm thrilled to have with me Reena Friedman-Watts. Reena, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
She and her team, or the team, have put together one of the most unique podcast conferences I've heard about in a long time. It's called Speke Fest. It's in Houston. I'm going to ask her to tell us all about it. But that's how we got connected. But it turns out she got a really great backstory. So we're going to start with tell us about your professional background, Reena.
Yeah, my professional background started, I think, at an NPR station in college where I read the news and weather. And I just wanted to work in the entertainment industry and kind of walked in and asked if they had any openings. And they were like, "Are you willing to work the 5 a.m. shift?" And I was like, "Sure." So I worked the weekends and the early shift and really kind of learned the ropes. And I thought I wanted to work in radio actually. So after working at a college station for a couple years, I got an interview at WGN in Chicago and was really excited, drove up from Purdue to Chicago and then didn't get the job. But while I was up there, I saw that Jerry Springer was looking for interns in the same courtyard.
Wow.
And yeah, I saw a flyer on the bulletin board and I just took the flyer down and walked across to NBC Tower, said I had an interview with the intern coordinator, and I ended up starting there 2 weeks later. So that's how I got my start.
Fun fact, I grew up in Houston and Studs Terkel, if you remember him, he had a syndicated national radio show from WGN.
Oh, wow.
And it was on every Saturday. And Saturday was the day I spent with my father because it was the only day he was home. But we would drive around and run errands, and he would always listen to the radio. So we listened to things like Gunsmoke and all of that, but we also listened to Studs Terkel. And so when I started podcasting, that was the person I wanted to emulate because he would just sit and have a conversation with somebody for an hour. And it could be literally about anything. Sometimes he'd say, "Today we're going to listen to Mozart." And he would play Mozart for an hour. And it was completely free form. Yeah. WGN Radio. Shout out WGN Radio and Studs Terkel. But
Yeah, that's great. And I love that you brought up the dad factor that you would listen to the radio with your dad. But I grew up also like my dad would drop me off at school and we would get a kick out of listening to the radio shows together. So that's funny. And I have a podcast with my dad now. So he's a total character. He's always wanted his own show. And I feel like now I've learned the technology to do it. And so I've now interviewed over 450 people. I share the stories with my dad, and then he weighs in with his intergenerational perspective at the end of every episode. So it's called Better Call Daddy because I literally call my dad at the end of every episode. And he's my guy. I'm my father's daughter and the son he never had. And I love the platform. I love interviewing people and having my own show too.
I can't think of anyone more different from Studs Terkel than Jerry Springer. So what was it like working on the Jerry Springer team and bring us forward from there up till Better Call Dad?
Oh my God, what a great transition you just did there. That's hysterical. Yeah, Jerry Springer was a whole vibe. That was just like the beginning of reality TV. I worked there pre-internet, really. So we were getting calls like 1-800-96 Jerry. People used to call into that number and they would give us their story and I would go through hundreds of calls a week, screening these calls to see if the people wanted to come that were involved in the stories. And sometimes people wouldn't even leave their name. It would just be like the message would say, "Girl 14 caught her grandmother in bed with her 18-year-old boyfriend." I'm like, okay. So I like call back the 14-year-old, try to make her my best friend, see if she can rope in the grandma, see if the 18-year-old will admit to it, and see if they'll all come to Chicago. It was crazy. And then I was there when we started getting internet leads though. And everybody was like, are we actually going to be able to book stories that way? Like it was just such a new phenomenon because we would fight over the callers, the people that called in, because we were putting on shows weekly. So each producer got one show a week and it was a quick turnaround to have to put three to five stories together a week. And I was chasing people through the streets of Chicago with a handy cam. I don't know if you watched much of the show, but sometimes we did some man on the street stuff that was pretty outlandish. And then from Jerry, I wanted to still work in TV, and I knew that Oprah wasn't going to hire me. So I moved to LA and really had to start all the way over. I had gone from intern to producer on the Jerry Springer show in a pretty short time because, as you can imagine, it's a rotating door of people that can handle that kind of high pressure. So I worked on that show for 2 full seasons and the start of another season. And then I moved to LA, and I was lucky enough to get an executive assistant role to 3 pretty seasoned producers and the Kyoto Brothers. So I worked for the Kyoto Brothers for a couple of years. They're the guys that did Killer Clowns from Outer Space, which was kind of a cult classic. They did Team America. They're like the marionette puppet guys. They do a lot of the puppets in Hollywood. And not only did I answer their phone, but I learned accounts payable and receivable and how to scout locations and kind of the business side of even putting together a pilot in Hollywood. So that was great. But they knew that I kind of wanted to be in the field and wanted to still be a producer and like work in reality TV. So I got an opportunity to work on a VH1 show and kind of travel to 7 cities. And they were like, go. And then the show didn't get picked up. I was like, can I come back and answer phones? So I did. I ended up doing that. And then, but still had that draw to really want to be on the creative side. So I ended up getting a job. When did I leave the second time? I think I got a post production supervisor role at an MTV show or Nanny 911. And they were, okay, if you're going to leave twice, like you got to spread your wings. And so we've kept in touch, and they were great. It was a family run business. One was a producer, one was a director, and one was an animator. And so I really got to see different sides of things. But yeah, I worked on a slew of reality TV shows at the forefront of that, and then met my husband on the 3rd season of Nanny 911 and kind of left Hollywood for a bit and moved to Silicon Valley. And then through his jobs and climbing the corporate ladder, we've moved around a lot. And I inched my way back into reality TV by working in court television for about 5 years. When my kids were in preschool, I would drop them off at preschool, go to the courthouses, scan small claims cases back to Hollywood. And I worked on Judge Alex and Hot Bench and divorce court. And I kept my foot in the door. And oh my gosh, it's been a wild ride. But I do have a love for story. And I think that came from working in casting.
So what brought you to Houston?
Oh yeah, there's a couple steps in between there. So we lived in Chicago for a decade. Actually, my husband got a job in my hometown in Kentucky. He transferred from working in Silicon Valley to working in GE Kentucky, and then that was actually where I grew up. And we got some special time with my grandparents and my parents, which was like amazing for my kids when they were young. And then we moved to Chicago because we wanted them to actually be in a big city and kind of have more opportunities. And then, yeah, the recruiters are always after my husband because he's a software guy. So he gets reached out to like all the time. And so somebody stole him from Chicago to Houston. He moved here to work in oil and gas. And then he switched to aerospace, which are the two kind of industries you will find in Houston. But started the podcast in Chicago. I had connected with a guy on LinkedIn who had like a recruiting podcast. Shout out to Greg Johnson. He had a show called Next Level People. It was him and this guy, Sean Hervey. And we had just a lot of things in common. Same birthday, got married around the same day, same number of kids in the same order. And he knew about my casting background. He was like, hey, would you ever want to cast people for my show? And then I did that for a while. And then he was like, would you ever want to co-host my show? So he kind of got me like started wanting to do that. And then when I did that for him, I ended up casting a guest that I felt would be good for a friend of mine who her show was kind of blowing up at the time. This girl, Kathy Heller. She was the host of Don't Keep Your Day Job. And I booked this guy, Miran Kirkosian, who was a backup dancer to Britney Spears and Madonna and big A-listers. And I was like, he went from being a backup dancer to now training other dancers. And he's made a whole career out of that. And so she had a show about turning a passion into a business. And she was like, I want to film him in front of a live studio audience. I was like, oh, that's crazy. I haven't seen you in 15 years. I would love to meet him. So I just booked myself a ticket, flew out to LA, stayed with her. And she was like, can you book me other guests like this? And so I ended up working for her for about a year, booking her Howard Schultz and Barbara Corcoran and like some big names. And then she made me a coach in her coaching program. And I learned how to create a Facebook group and how to be a coach and all of these things. And then the pandemic happened, and then I launched my own show.
Very cool. So what have you been up to? Bring us up to date since the pandemic and you launched your own show.
Yeah, I will have to say one of my biggest accomplishments of launching my own show was I got to interview Jerry Springer 20 years later, and that was a huge highlight for me.
Yeah.
It felt kind of God-given. I had kept in touch with his publicist for 20 plus years, and I got a yes, I got a no, I got a yes, I got a no, but I was like, okay. So I listened to him giving speeches at colleges, and I heard him interviewed on some bigger podcasts, and he actually had a podcast. He had kind of a political show where he went back to Cincinnati where he was mayor. And so I did my research. I really was kind of stalking the guy. And I pitched the publicist, like, hey, I've heard him
Yeah.
speak here and there, and I know he's got his own podcast, and here would be my angle. And she went for it. And I got to interview him a year before he passed away. And it was super meaningful just getting to ask him things like, hey, how much did you know about what we went through to get that show on? Like, I always wanted to know, did he really understand what the producers went through to make that happen? Because he pretty much just showed up and he had it down. Like, he said something funny, but he was just that guy. He was a newscaster. He was an Emmy-winning newscaster, and he had that Donahue newscaster feel. And
I want to
so,
go
yeah.
back to I want to go back to something you said because it's incredibly important, and it was what you did to get ready to pitch him and then how you pitched him. I did the same thing once with a guy named John Lee Dumas, who has one
Yeah.
of the top entrepreneur podcasts, but I wanted to interview him for what happened to him on 9/11 because that day he was a senior in college in ROTC. And I'd heard him talk about that night being told, son, you're going to war. And I wanted to ask him what that was like as a 21-year-old. But I did what you did. I listened to the other podcasts and I knew he'd never talked about it on a pod. And his publicist was his wife, and I pitched her, and she just came back and said, wow, no one's ever asked to talk to him about this. But how did you craft that? Because I've heard, and he has given the example of how you can craft a pitch to, if not a famous person, someone who is on media a lot and they talk a lot and they just don't want to come up and say, I did this or I did that. How did you do that? And how did you think through the pitch?
Yeah, great question. And that's even something that I feel I want to talk about at this event that's coming up. It's relating to other interviews that they've done and seeing like a hole in it. So that's kind of what you said. It was like you knew that. I actually was at Jerry Springer during 9/11. I was at Jerry Springer before the internet happened. Jerry Springer was my first job out of college, which was a lot of the people who worked there. So it was like a coming of age story. And I think that is like something that a lot of people could relate to. And something else unique to me is I've kept in touch with some of my Jerry Springer guests for over 20 years. I wanted to tell him that. And I went back to people that had worked with me on the crew that I'm still in touch with. And I was like, hey, if you got to interview Jerry, what would you ask him? And people are like, does he remember me? Because he's had this illustrious career. He's been on Dancing with the Stars. He had a court TV show. He's done so many things. He's had his own podcast. He had one of the longest running shows in history, 27 years. So every crew member wants to be remembered. And it's kind of like when you go to a concert and if you've gotten through to the musician, they're like, do you remember me? Everybody wants to be remembered. So I was kind of like that. Not only did I want to know if you remembered me, I was 21 when I started on the show. I'm now a mom of 4. And 2, like his parents were Holocaust survivors. And I knew that was something that he had kind of been interviewed about and talked about. And I'm a Jewish girl from Kentucky, so I related to him that way. So it was kind of like finding the things that were unique to our relationship. I wanted to talk about those things. The
Well,
time that
cool.
I had spent with him, no one else had spent that time together, and I tried to draw from that experience.
I have to say, I'm probably gonna have to do a whole podcast with you just on that topic. And you definitely need to speak about that at Speke Fest Houston. But let's turn to Speke Fest Houston, and we have to start with the venue. This is the most unique venue for any event I've ever heard of, but certainly a podcast event. Tell us about the venue, why y'all selected it, and how it's really going to facilitate the kind of vibe you're trying to create.
Yeah, so Freddie Cruz, who's putting on the event with me, he worked for KRBE in Houston for about 16 years, and he met the National Museum of Funeral History through that, through his radio job, and now they're a client of his. He produces about 13 podcasts here locally in Houston. And yeah, they put on events there, and he was like, "How cool would it be to actually get all of these podcasters together, content creators together, small business owners together, and do an event there?" And so there's never been a podcasting event there, but it's a great space for workshops, for posing with a crematorium, and it's around Halloween. So it's going to be Halloween themed. Actually, there's another girl, her name is Doctora Sandra Montgomery, and I've interviewed her on my podcast. She's a daddy's girl. And her birthday and my birthday are both in October. So she was like, "Hey, would you be up for wearing one of these like flower crown things?" I was like, "Okay, yeah, like Night of the Living Dead." But yeah, I mean, I think people might put on some bleeding lips or black eyes and do some special effects makeup, take some headshots that way. We're having fun. And I think when you have fun, that draws people. And when you have a unique venue like the funeral museum, everybody's, "Whoa, I didn't know there was a funeral museum. I didn't know there was a funeral museum in Houston." That's fun. So we're using it as a prop.
When I told my wife about your event, the first thing she said was, "I didn't know they had a funeral museum in Houston. And where is it? Why didn't we ever go?"
Yeah.
Well, can you tell us about some of the guests and what you're hoping to be able to communicate beyond just the vibe?
Yeah, thank you for asking. We have nonprofit owners that are podcasters that are coming. We have a banker that's coming that's a podcaster. So we're showing that podcasting can work across many verticals, and we're showing people that are actually using it in their businesses and how that works. And the thing I love is because you go to all these conferences and they attract you with these celebrities or these well-known people, but you don't get to talk to them about how they're break it down for me, be transparent. And we're going to have all of that. Actually, the first night we're screening a documentary after the workshops and the games and the speeches. And then the second night we have a DJ that Freddie knew from KRBE. So it's going to be kind of like a networking and music. And we're trying to make it fun, but also educational. So it's going to be a mix of business owners, content creators, and podcasters, and then workshops, games, and keynotes.
What's your role in the event going to be besides sort of co-producing?
Yeah, so I am doing a workshop on how to craft a killer interview. And I am going to be pulling people out of the audience and showing the difference between being scared or prepared. So there will be people there that I have interviewed already and I know can pitch themselves in under 3 minutes. And then there's people that have probably never told their story before. And how do you make those people comfortable on the mic? How do you make those people comfortable on the camera? And let's give them a try too.
Very cool. If someone wanted to find out more about the event, where would they go?
Speakpodcasting.com. So that's speak, SPEKE. So it is spelled not like you give us a speech, but speakpodcasting.com. And if you want to connect with me, you can find me on all social at Reena Friedman-Watts.
So I had one more question for you. What were your top 2 or 3 episodes with your dad? What are the
Yeah,
ones that really stand out for you?
I have to say episode 210 with Jerry Springer was like worth creating the show for, but I've also gotten some other just stories that have come my way that will stay with me probably forever. Like there was a girl from Chicago who was told that she would only live until she was 2 years old, and now she's in her mid-20s. She has a rare form of muscular dystrophy. Her name is Lily Brash. She's a daddy's girl. Her dad is actually a doctor, and one thing that he said was, "I know doctors aren't always right." And "I'm gonna get you the best care and the best trainers, and we're gonna keep you strong." And she's now won 2 Guinness World Book records for climbing the furthest of a girl with muscular dystrophy and swimming the farthest. And she's got herself into Columbia University. She's walked New York Fashion Week. They're doing a documentary about her. I also connected with Zion Clark, who is on America's Got Talent. He's a paraplegic. I don't know if you watched that. He has a Netflix show. Got into wrestling even as a paraplegic. He's been on Ellen. So it's connected me with all kinds of stories that I never would have connected to otherwise. Another girl reached out to me and said, I forgave my father's murderer. So a lot of daddy angle stories, which have been interesting. Another guy from Australia who was a sperm donor to 25 people. I was like, I never thought I'd be talking about that with my father, but very interesting episode. So I've kind of tried to take like my love of story and wild and crazy stories from Jerry Springer. And then instead of Jerry weighing in with his final thought, my dad adds his 2 cents at the end of every episode.
Very cool. Arena, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this episode, and I'm really looking forward to visiting with you again.
Thank you so much for having me.